Iran's air force was gone in days. Not degraded, not weakened, gone. F-14S destroyed on the tarmac before a single one got off the ground. Su-24S shot down before they reached their targets. By the first week of March 2026, US and Israeli aircraft weren't competing for Iranian airspace. They owned it. The pilots, the planes, the radar networks, dismantled all of it. But here's what most people missed while they were watching the air war unfold. There's another kind of weapon, one that doesn't need an air force, one that doesn't need a runway or a pilot or a chain of command that can get decapitated in a single strike. And in the months before the shooting started, China made sure Iran had it. Go back to June 2025. The 12-day war. Israel's Operation Rising Lion rips through Iran's air defense network. US strikes hit the nuclear sites, the ones Tehran had been quietly rebuilding for years. Senior commanders are killed. The IRGC is left sitting in the rubble trying to figure out what it still has that could actually threaten the forces now closing in around it. Iran's military had been gutted. Air defenses gone. Nuclear facilities hit. The country that had positioned itself as the dominant military power of the region was suddenly scrambling. China had been watching every minute of it, very carefully. The relationship between China and Iran goes back years. And it's never really been about ideology. It's transactional. For a long time, China had been buying Iranian oil under the table, goods, currency, and hard cash in exchange for barrels, quietly keeping Tehran's economy alive while Western sanctions were supposed to be strangling it. A January 2026 report from the U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission put a specific number on it. Iranian oil accounted for 13.4% of China's seaborne oil imports. Sit with that for a second. 13.4%. That's not a diplomatic favor or a rounding error on some trade spreadsheet. That's a structural dependency. If Iran collapses, China loses one of its most critical oil pipelines overnight. So after June 2025, after Iran's military got demolished, China didn't back away from that relationship. It leaned into it harder. According to reporting from Reuters and the Financial Times, Iran and China had been negotiating a weapons package since 2024. After the June strikes, those negotiations accelerated fast. The reported deal, worth around $5 billion, included HQ-9B surface-to-air missile systems, Sunflower 200 kamikaze drones, man-portable air defense systems, and the weapon at the center of all of this, the CM-302 supersonic anti-ship cruise missile. Then Khamenei made it obvious exactly what he was thinking. As U.S. carriers were massing near Iranian waters in February 2026, he wrote publicly, "More dangerous than that warship is the weapon that can send that warship to the bottom of the sea." He wasn't performing for a domestic audience. He wasn't bluffing. He was describing something specific, something that had already been delivered, already positioned, already pointed at the most powerful naval force in the world. The CM-302. The CM-302 is the export designation for China's YJ-12 anti-ship missile, the version Beijing sells to countries it wants armed, but not with everything. The YJ-12 in Chinese Navy service has a reported range of up to 400 kilometers. The export version gets capped at 290, a deliberate ceiling, keeping the most capable version for Beijing's own forces. Still, 290 kilometers is enough to cover the entire Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman from Iran's coastline. Every ship, every channel, every choke point. So what makes this missile different from the anti-ship weapons Iran already had before June 2025? One word: speed. The CM-302 travels at between Mach 2.5 and Mach 3. We're talking somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 kilometers per hour. This isn't a subsonic cruise missile slowly working its way toward a target, giving a ship's crew minutes to react and coordinate a response. This is a weapon that covers 290 kilometers in under 6 minutes. At that speed, from the moment a U.S. ship's radar picks it up to the moment it arrives, the defensive window isn't measured in minutes, it's measured in seconds. Every decision that has to happen, every system that has to respond, compressed into a window that was never designed to be that short. And it doesn't come in high and fast where it's easy to track. It flies low, sea-skimming trajectory, hugging the surface of the water to shrink its radar cross-section and reduce the detection range, compressing the reaction time even further. Then, in the terminal phase, the final seconds before impact, it maneuvers. Corkscrew-like evasive movements, specifically engineered to break the fire control solutions that a ship's defensive systems generate to intercept an incoming threat. The warhead is approximately 250 kilograms of conventional high explosive, enough to inflict catastrophic damage on a destroyer, potentially enough to do serious, lasting damage to an aircraft carrier. The guidance system works in layers. Inertial navigation combined with China's Beidou satellite system gets it to the target area. Then an active radar seeker activates in the terminal phase, autonomous hunting, locking onto the ship and guiding itself the rest of the way. There's also a data link channel, which means the operator on the ground can redirect the missile after it's already in the air, updating the target if the ship has moved or if a different ship becomes the priority. The Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance described the YJ-12 family as the most dangerous anti-ship missile China has produced. The U.S. Navy has been aware of its existence for years. What changed in February 2026 wasn't the missile, it was who had it. Now, can it actually sink a carrier? That question has a more complicated answer than most people expect, because most people picture an aircraft carrier as just a very large ship. It isn't. A carrier strike group is a layered defensive system, and understanding what the CM-302 is actually up against requires understanding how that system works. A standard U.S. Navy carrier strike group includes the carrier itself, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, 2 to 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, 1 or more attack submarines, and logistics and support ships. Together, they don't just sail near each other. They form an interconnected defensive architecture designed to kill threats at multiple ranges simultaneously. The outermost layer is the air wing itself. F/A-18 Super Hornets and F-35Cs flying combat air patrol, far from the carrier, looking for the platform that's going to fire the missile before it can fire. Kill the launcher, and the CM-302 never leaves the ground. That's the preferred outcome. No missile, no problem. The next layer is the Aegis Combat System, the integrated radar and weapons control network on the cruiser and destroyers. The newest ships carry the AN/SPY-6 radar, 30 times more sensitive than its predecessor, capable of simultaneously tracking over 100 targets at ranges beyond 100 nautical miles. Against incoming anti-ship cruise missiles, these ships launch SM-2 and SM-6 interceptors. From vertical launch cells, the SM-6 is worth focusing on for a second. It's dual-capable, handles both air defense and ballistic missile defense. Extended range, active radar seeker can engage a supersonic cruise missile in the terminal phase. Each one costs approximately $4 million. The ships carry dozens of them. Past that, the Evolved Sea Sparrow missile, a system designed specifically for fast, low-flying threats like the CM-302. Then the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System, a last-ditch radar-guided cannon firing 4,500 rounds per minute at anything that gets through every previous layer. And after that, rolling airframe missiles as a final barrier before impact. On paper. And this is genuinely impressive. This is an extraordinary amount of defensive firepower, multiple distinct opportunities to kill the same incoming missile, electronic warfare, decoys, chaff clouds, a well-trained crew that has practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times. But here's the thing that sits underneath all of it. Every single layer of that defense works better when it has time. More time means more radar tracking data, better firing solutions, more engagement opportunities, more chances to try again if the first shot misses. The entire system is optimized for scenarios where it can work the problem over seconds and minutes. And the CM-302 was engineered specifically to take that time away. Here's what doesn't get nearly enough attention when people talk about this missile. The Persian Gulf is small, not figuratively, physically small. At its widest point, roughly 340 kilometers across. Iran's coastline runs the entire northern edge of that body of water. The Strait of HORMUZ, where about 20% of the world's oil supply moves, is only about 55 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. A CM-302, launched from the Iranian coast, can hit almost anything in the Persian Gulf. In the open ocean, the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, a carrier strike group has room to breathe. It can stand off at distance from potential threats. It can maneuver. The outer defensive layers have the space and time to engage incoming missiles at long range, with multiple opportunities before anything gets close. The math works in the defender's favor. In the Persian Gulf, that math collapses. A carrier operating near the Strait of Hormuz is already inside CM 302, range from Iran's coastline. By definition, there's no positioning choice that fixes this. The geography doesn't allow it. At Mach 3, covering 200 kilometers takes under 3 minutes. The Aegis system might detect it. A firing solution might be generated. Interceptors might be in the air. But the number of actual engagement windows before impact drops dramatically compared to any open ocean scenario. This is why analysts at the Hudson Institute, writing in September 2025, argued that the CM-302 should be understood not primarily as a carrier killer, but as a blockade weapon. Launched from Iran's coast, it can threaten every ship in the Persian Gulf, not just carriers, every tanker, every commercial vessel, every military hull operating in those confined waters. The strategic objective isn't necessarily to sink ships at scale, it's to generate enough credible risk that the adversary has to divert disproportionate defensive resources to stay, or has to decide it's simply not worth it, and stays out. A weapon that keeps US carriers out of the Persian Gulf doesn't need to sink one. It just needs to make the calculation expensive enough that staying becomes the harder choice. So here's the real question, and it's not the one most people are asking. Most people want to know, can the CM-302 sink a US carrier? The right question is, what does China gain from Iran having it at all? China built this missile. China negotiated its delivery to a country sitting at the edge of the world's most important oil choke point, with 2 US carrier strike groups operating nearby. Whether the missiles arrived in time or not, China was watching how US carriers positioned themselves, watching what Iran's coastal defense network looked like against a real adversary, watching the electronic warfare environment that any Chinese anti-ship missile would eventually have to defeat, because Iran wasn't just a customer, Iran was a data point. According to a September 2025 Hudson Institute report, China's Changguang satellite technology had already been providing real-time intelligence to Iranian proxies to enable attacks on US shipping. China wasn't only a potential arms supplier in this conflict, it was already collecting data. The missile that was almost in Iran's hands in 2026 is the direct ancestor of the weapon being refined right now, with everything China learns from watching this conflict play out. And the place that matters isn't the Persian Gulf, it's the Taiwan Strait. Drop your answer in the comments. Do you think the CM-302 deal goes through after this conflict ends? And what does that mean for every US carrier that has to operate near a Chinese interest in the future? If you want to understand the full weapons architecture China is building, specifically to keep US carriers out of the Taiwan Strait, the DF-21D, the YJ-18, the entire A2/AD system. That breakdown is right here. Subscribe. New video every week.